She had been counting the same 3 coins for 22 minutes when the pharmacist told her to leave. It was 11:43 p.m. on a Friday in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, and the woman behind the counter had not looked up once during those 22 minutes. She had been sorting pill bottles, checking labels, moving things from one shelf to another, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had decided long ago that the people on the other side of the counter were a category, not a collection of individuals. The man standing at the counter was not a woman. He was 67 years old, 141 pounds, wearing a brown jacket that had been washed so many times the collar had gone soft at the edges. His name was not yet known to the pharmacist. It would be known to her before the night was over. He had 3 coins in his hand. He had counted them 4 times. They added up to 85 cents, which was $14.15 short of the $15. Dozero, his daughter's wedding invitation, had told him to bring for the parking at the venue. He had not brought the coins for parking. He had brought them because they were what remained after the bus fare from Inglewood to Halsted and 47th, and he was holding them, because holding them was the last thing he had to do with his hands that felt like it meant something. He was not trying to buy anything from this pharmacy. He had simply walked inside because it was cold, and the wedding was at 9 a.m., and it was now 11:43 p.m., and he had nowhere to be until morning. The pharmacist said, "Without looking up, sir, if you're not purchasing anything, I need you to move along." He put the coins in his jacket pocket. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He walked back out into the November air. What the pharmacist did not know, what the security guard at the venue did not know, what his daughter Chidinma did not know as she slept 8 blocks away in the bridal suite of the Hyatt Regency on Michigan Avenue, was that the brown jacket the old man was wearing had, sewn into its inner lining, a document that would make the banker who was marrying his daughter sit very still in a very quiet room the following afternoon. His name was Tobena Akebi. He had been born in Enugu, Nigeria in 1957, the third of 5 children, and he had come to Chicago in 1988 with a degree in civil engineering from the University of Nigeria and $340 in his left shoe, and a letter of introduction to a construction firm in the South Loop that had been written by a professor who no longer worked at that firm by the time Tobena arrived. He had found work anyway. He had found it the way people find it when they have no other options, by standing at the site entrance every morning at 5:30 a.m. until someone needed an extra pair of hands, until that someone became a foreman who asked questions and listened to the answers, until the foreman became a project manager who remembered a name. He had built 23 years in that firm. He had risen to senior structural engineer by 2001. He had designed the load-bearing framework for 3 mid-rise buildings on the west side, one of which had his calculations in its foundation and his daughter's name scratched into the concrete during the pour, because she had been 4 years old that week, and he had wanted the city to hold her name somewhere permanent. He had married a woman named Blessing Ndukwo in 1991. Blessing had been a nurse at Rush University Medical Center, and she had smelled of antiseptic and cocoa butter, and she had laughed at things that Tobena said before he finished saying them, which had made him feel, for the first time in his adult life, that he was being listened to completely. They had raised Chidinma together in a 2-bedroom apartment on South Boulevard. Chidinma had been the kind of child who organized her books by color and who asked questions that started with "but why?" and ended with silence, because she was already thinking through the answer before it arrived. She had been extraordinary, and Tobena had known it the way you know the weight of something you carry every day. Blessing had died in 2014, in March, from a cardiac event that the attending physician at Rush, the hospital where she had worked for 19 years, had described as sudden and uncomplicated, which Tobena had understood was doctor language for the worst possible kind of surprise. After Blessing died, Tobena had sold the apartment on South Boulevard and moved to a single room in Inglewood and reduced his life to the things that fit inside it: a bed, a table, a photograph of Blessing in a blue frame on the wall above the table, and a blue notebook in which he kept the accounts of the last 23 years of his life. Not money accounts, but records, dates, costs, receipts, the kind of notebook kept by a man who understood, at some cellular level, that the numbers of a life matter even when no one is asking to see them. Chidinma had visited him 4 times in the 2 years after Blessing died. Then 3 times in the year after that. Then once. Then not at all, though she was still in Chicago, still 8 blocks from the Hyatt Regency on Michigan Avenue, still answering his calls on the first or second ring for about a year before the calls started going to voicemail, and the voicemails started going unreturned, and the silence settled between them, the way silence settles when no one wants to name what is happening. He had understood what was happening. He had understood it in the specific, precise way he understood structural load, by calculating what was bearing weight and what was not, by identifying where the stress was concentrated, by accepting that some materials have a tolerance beyond which they do not recover their original shape. Chidinma had met Gerald Mensah in 2019. Gerald was 36, a senior loan officer at First Atlantic Bank, drove a 2021 Lexus RX in pearl white, and had a mother who lived in a house in Wilmette that had a circular driveway. Tobena had met Gerald once, at a dinner in 2020 that Chidinma had arranged at a restaurant in Wicker Park, where the cheapest item on the menu was $34. Gerald had shaken Tobena's hand with both hands and called him sir 3 times in the first 4 minutes, and then spent the rest of the evening talking to Chidinma, as though Tobena were a piece of furniture that had been placed considerately near the exit. The wedding invitation arrived in an envelope with gold lettering. Tobena had held it for a long time at his kitchen table in Englewood. Chidinma Achebe and Gerald Mensah. Saturday, November 14th. The ceremony was at the Church of the Holy Name Cathedral on North State Street. The reception was at the Hyatt Regency. There was a dress code listed at the bottom: smart formal. There was a RSVP number. There was no personal note inside. He had called the RSVP number and confirmed his attendance. The woman who answered had asked for his name, and he had spelled it for her, and she had said, "One guest, Mist Achebe?" And he had said, "One guest." And he had sat for a moment after he hung up, then opened his blue notebook and written the date. He had one suit. He had bought it in 1998 for a company awards dinner, and it was charcoal gray, and it still fit him, because he had not changed shape in any direction that mattered. He had taken it to a dry cleaner on 63rd Street 3 weeks before the wedding and paid $12.50 to have it cleaned and pressed. He had polished his black shoes with a cloth he kept in the bathroom for that purpose. He had ironed his white shirt the night before the wedding with a travel iron he had owned since 2002. He was dressed by 6:30 a.m., which was 2.5 hours before the ceremony, because he had wanted to be sure, and also because he had nowhere else to be. The bus ride from Englewood to North State Street took 47 minutes. He arrived at Holy Name Cathedral at 7:58 a.m. and sat in a pew near the back, because the pew near the back was where the father of the bride was least likely to cause difficulty. The cathedral was already being dressed by florists, white lilies and eucalyptus, the smell of cut stems and something cold and green. He sat with his hands on his knees and watched the lilies being arranged and thought about the specific structural elegance of a cathedral ceiling. The way the load is distributed outward through the buttresses, so the interior can be entirely open, so nothing inside needs to hold anything up. The guests arrived at 8:30. They came in pairs and clusters, wearing things that cost what they cost. Gerald's family occupied the first 4 rows on the right side. They were a large family, well-dressed in the specific way that people are well-dressed when they have had time to practice it. Tobena watched them fill the pews and recognized one woman, Gerald's mother, whom he had seen in a photograph, who wore a green gel that added 8 inches to her height and moved through the cathedral entrance as though the architecture had been designed around her. Chidinma's side was smaller. There were college friends and work colleagues and a cluster of women from Blessing's old church who had come in matching gold head ties and who nodded at Tobena when they saw him, and one of them, a woman named Constance, who had known Blessing for 21 years, reached over and squeezed his hand once, and then let go. Chidinma came down the aisle at 9:07 a.m. And she was extraordinary. She wore a dress that had been made for her body, and she moved the way she had always moved, with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows where they are going. And Tobena sat in his pew near the back and watched his daughter walk toward the man she had chosen. And he felt the full weight of what it is to have made something this complete, and to have had so little to do with it by now. She did not look at him as she passed. This was not an accident. The reception was held in the Hyatt Regency Ballroom. The tables were arranged around a central dance floor, and each one had a name card system. Tobena found his card on a table near the wall, at the far end of the room from the head table, between a man he did not know and a woman he did not know. He sat down. He drank the water that was already in his glass. The man beside him introduced himself as a colleague of Gerald's and talked for several minutes about interest rates. Tobena listened and said the appropriate things at the appropriate intervals. The meal came. It was chicken in a cream sauce and rice and something green. It was very good. Tobena ate it carefully. The speeches began at 1:15 p.m. Gerald's best man spoke. Gerald's uncle spoke. A friend of Chidinma's spoke and made everyone laugh twice. Then there was a pause in the program, and the MC, a man with a wireless microphone and the practiced energy of someone hired for exactly this purpose, said, "And now we would like to invite the father of the bride to say a few words." There was a polite stirring in the room. Heads turned. The MC looked at his notes. He looked up. Tobena did not stand. He did not stand because no one had told him he was on the program. He did not stand because when the MC's eyes found him at the far wall table, there was a half-second of confusion in them that told Tobena everything he needed to know about what had been communicated to this MC, about who the father of the bride was and where he would be sitting. He did not stand because Chidinma, at the head table, had gone very still in the way people go still when something they hoped would not happen is beginning to happen. The MC said, smoothly, professionally, "Mr. Akebe, would you like to come up? If this story is already making something move in your chest, subscribe now, because what happens in the next 4 minutes is something this room was not prepared for." Tobena stood. He was 67 years old and 141 pounds, and he was wearing a charcoal gray suit he had bought in 1998, and he walked from the far wall table to the microphone stand at the center of the room. And he did it without hurrying, because he had never in his life done anything important by hurrying. He took the microphone from the MC. He looked out at the room, at Gerald's mother in her green gel, at the college friends and the bank colleagues, at Constance from Blessing's church, who was already pressing her fingers together, at Gerald, who was holding his champagne glass with both hands, at his daughter Chidinma, who was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her face since she was 9 years old and had broken a window and was waiting to find out what the consequence would be. He said, "My name is Tobena Akebe. I am Chidinma's father." He said it quietly, the way a man states a fact that has never required argument. I came to this country in 1988 with $340 and a letter that didn't work, he said. I built a life here because that is the only thing I knew how to build. I built it with Blessing, Chidinma's mother, who is not here today, but who is here today, if you understand what I mean. He paused. I am an engineer by training, he said. We think about load. We think about what a structure is required to carry and what it is not required to carry, and what happens when the load is distributed incorrectly. A building that looks solid from the outside can have a stress concentration in one joint that the whole thing is quietly waiting to correct. Gerald set his champagne glass down. I have a gift for my daughter, Tobena said. He reached into the inner lining of his brown jacket. The jacket he had been wearing at 11:43 p.m. the night before in a pharmacy on Halsted and 47th, and he removed a folded document. He unfolded it once, and then again, and held it with both hands. In 2001, he said, I designed the load-bearing framework for a building on the west side. The project was a joint venture. I was a senior structural engineer. As part of the compensation arrangement, I was offered a choice between a cash payment and an equity stake in the development company. I took the stake. He looked at the document. I took it because Blessing told me to. She said, Tobena, a thing that grows is better than a thing that is spent. She was almost always right about these things. The room was not moving. That development company became Westside Infrastructure Partners, he said. It is currently managing 11 commercial properties across Cook County. The equity stake I hold, as of this past Thursday when I had it independently valued for the first time in 4 years, is worth $1.3 million. He folded the document. I have had a letter drafted by my attorney transferring 40% of that stake into a trust in my daughter's name alone. Not in the name of the household. In her name. It will be registered on Monday morning. She can do whatever she wants with it. She can sell it. She can hold it. She can use it to build something. She can use it to leave something. The choice is entirely hers. He held the document out. Chidinma, he said. She was already standing. She had stood up from the head table without deciding to, the way the body sometimes moves before the mind has caught up to what is true. She walked from the head table to the center of the room, and she walked the way she always walked, but slower. And she stopped in front of her father, and he placed the document in her hands with both of his. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Her mouth moved once without producing a word. He said, Your mother's instruction. A thing that grows. What happened in Chidinma's face in that moment is not something that can be described by the narrator as devastation, or joy, or guilt, or love. Because none of those words are large enough, and none of them are accurate on their own, and the narrator's job is to describe what is observable. What is observable is this. Her hands tightened around the document, and she closed her eyes for 3 seconds. And when she opened them, her father was still there, exactly where he had been. And she stepped forward and pressed her face against his shoulder the way she had not done since she was a child. And he put one hand on the back of her head, and he held her the way a man holds something he built and thought he'd lost and found again, in a room full of people who had just understood something they had not understood when they walked in. Gerald Mensah did not move from the head table. His champagne glass was still on the tablecloth in front of him. His mother, in the green gel, was looking at him. He did not look back at her. The MC said nothing for 11 seconds, which is a very long time for a microphone to be live in a ballroom. Constance, from Blessing's church, was pressing her fingers to her mouth. The woman beside her in the gold head tie was looking at the ceiling and blinking. The conversation that happened between Chidinma and Tobena that evening was not in the ballroom. It was in a corridor outside the Hyatt Regency kitchen, where the catering staff moved around them with trays without comment. Because catering staff at hotels understand that corridors are where the real conversations happen. Chidinma stood with the document against her chest and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And Tobena said, "I didn't know the right time." She said, "You should have called me." And he said, "I called you 11 times between February and June. I have the dates in my notebook." She said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "I know." And he said, "I know you know." He did not say anything about the gate, or the phone, or the years of silence. He did not say anything about the night before in the pharmacy on Halsted. He did not say anything about sitting in a cathedral pew near the back for 2.5 hours. He had not come here to say those things. He had come here because his daughter was getting married, and he was her father, and those were the only facts that required managing. What happened in the Mensah household in the weeks after the wedding? What happened between Chidinma and Gerald in the conversations that followed the ballroom and the corridor, and the Monday morning when the trust was registered at the attorney's office? Those things belong to them. What matters for this story is what happened on the following Saturday morning, when Chidinma drove to Inglewood for the first time in 3 years and knocked on the door of the single room where her father lived. And he opened it, and she was standing there with 2 containers of food. Jollof rice from a place on 63rd Street that her mother had taken her to when she was 7. And she said, "I want to see your notebook." And he stood back from the door and let her in. She sat at his table. He brought the notebook from the drawer and set it in front of her. She opened it and began reading the dates and the costs and the records of 23 years, and she read for a long time. He made tea. He put a mug in front of her. She did not look up from the notebook. The photograph of Blessing was on the wall above the table, in the blue frame, and Blessing was smiling in it the way she had smiled when she was listening to Tobena finish a sentence, which was the way she had always smiled. After a while, Chidinma said, "She told you to take the equity stake." "In 2001, he said. She knew. She almost always did." Chidinma closed the notebook. She put both hands flat on the cover. She stayed like that for a moment. Then she picked up the mug of tea. The thing about a structure built to carry load is that it does not advertise its strength. The beam that is holding the building up does not announce itself. It simply holds. It holds through the weather and the years and the weight of everything above it, and it does not stop holding, because no one has come to notice. And there are engineers who walk into old buildings and put their hands on the walls and feel for what is carrying the load, and they know immediately, without having to be told, what has been doing the work all along. They recognize it, not because it is obvious, because they were trained to look. There are people in our lives who have been holding something for us since before we understood what it was. Not loudly, not with announcement. In a brown jacket, with soft collar edges. In a blue notebook, in a drawer. In the inner lining of a garment worn to a pharmacy at midnight with 85 cents in a pocket and nowhere to go until morning. And still, carrying the thing that was meant for you. You can close a person out of the room where your life is happening and believe the closing is final. You can seat them at the far table near the wall and call it protocol, and have the florists arrange white lilies and not look at them as you walk past. But what they carry does not stop being yours. What they built from the long quiet years does not disappear because you stopped looking. A thing that grows is not canceled by the years you spend looking away from it. It simply continues growing in the direction of the person it was always meant for. And the MC stood at the microphone in silence for 11 seconds. Because some moments require the microphone to simply hold the air while the room adjusts to what it has just learned. While a daughter walks from a head table to the center of the room. While a document changes hands. While a father stands in a gray suit and says nothing more than what is true. That is what quiet power looks like, not the power that announces itself. The kind that was already there. The kind that was built in the dark while everyone was looking somewhere else. Here is the question I want to leave with you. If your father had been sitting at a far table near the wall at the most important moment of your life, and you had put him there, and he still stood up and gave you the most generous thing he had ever built, would you have the courage to knock on his door the following Saturday? Not to apologize. Just to sit down. Just to ask to see the notebook. Leave your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to read what you think. Subscribe for more stories about the people who keep showing up, who keep building, who keep holding the weight in silence, until the moment the room finally goes still and understands what has been there all along. I'll see you in the next one.